When I walk into a room full of people, I see humans, but some people see a meal. Beyond the walls of humanity lies a breed of criminals so cruel and horrific that most of them have been exiled for life. Cannibals. Those incarcerated haunt the prisons and are feared for what they did inside and outside of jail. They have been feared for years, not just for the crimes they committed, but for their dark and twisted psyche. Here are some spine-chilling cases of the most feared cannibals in jail. Paul Fitzgerald. There are only a few inmates who are a menace and danger to society, both inside and outside of jail. Paul Fitzgerald is one of them. Fitzgerald was diagnosed with multiple psychological troubles which were apparent in his crimes, and even when he was convicted of them. When Paul Fitzgerald was sentenced to 34 years in jail for the rape and murder of fellow inmate Richard Huckle, he laughed and yawned during the interrogation, displaying complete nonchalance to the verdict. But what crime was so cruel that it demanded a sentence so strict? Let's dive into it. Paul Fitzgerald wasn't unfamiliar with the world of crime and had a long history of criminal offenses. He committed his first crime at the age of 12 when he assaulted a 4-year-old in 2004 and was convicted at 13. After receiving warnings from loyalist paramilitaries, he was moved to Wales and just 2 years later committed another offense when he attacked another person. Post these crimes, he was moved to a facility in West Yorkshire where he was the only inmate. Despite constant supervision, he managed to escape and threatened to stab another lady with a fork should she scream. On searching Fitzgerald's room, guards found many notebooks where he had expressed a desire to rape and assault women. In 2009, Paul Fitzgerald was convicted of several charges, including assault and assault with the intention of rape, and was incarcerated in Full Sutton Prison. This prison also housed the United Kingdom's most notorious pedophile, Richard Huckle, who was convicted in 2016 and given 22 life sentences for assaulting over 190 victims and offenses almost too vile to mention. In 2019, Paul Fitzgerald assaulted and murdered Richard Huckle in a 78-minute harrowing attack. Fitzgerald gagged and bound his victim, strangled him with an electric cord, and proceeded to sodomize him with a blunt kitchen utensil. Fitzgerald also smashed his face on the cell floor multiple times and stabbed him in the neck, and if that wasn't enough, Paul also shoved a pen so far up Huckle's nose that it reached his brain. Fitzgerald also expressed his intentions of cooking and eating Huckle's meat, though he never followed through. Fitzgerald called the incident poetic justice and wanted Huckle to feel what his victims felt, which is rather ironic considering the two were practically in the same boat. He had also confessed to unleashing the same wrath on several other inmates, but claimed that he was having too much fun with Huckle. In psychological assessment, it was revealed that Paul Fitzgerald suffered from a conduct disorder from an early age, gender personality dysphoria, and personality disorder. Emotionless and calm, Fitzgerald recalls feeling high as a kite at the time of the murder. Presiding Judge Honorable Mr. Justice Lavender said, "You are a psychopath and derive pleasure from imagining torturing, raping, killing, and even eating others. You went into his cell equipped and intended to rape and kill Mr. Huckle, and if possible, cook and eat parts of him. As you said yourself, you committed murder in cold blood. What's shocking is that this feared cannibal managed to go unnoticed for almost 80 minutes while he murdered a fellow inmate. Who's to say that the ordeal could have amounted to something much more sinister?" Stephen Griffiths. Every serial killer has a calling card, something so defining in the way they kill that is instantly recognizable. One such killer and cannibal was Stephen Griffiths, also known as the crossbow cannibal, who in 2010 was sentenced to life without parole for the murder of 3 sex workers, Susan Rushworth, Shelley Armitage, and Suzanne Blamires. His weapon of choice? A crossbow, which he used to kill his victims and then dismember them and eat parts of their bodies. But even before this, Griffiths wasn't a stranger to criminal offenses, and these past transgressions should have been warning signs for the law for something much more sinister to come. What started as petty crimes growing up metamorphosed into much darker and menacing ones. At the age of 17, Griffiths slashed the face of a store clerk with a knife when he was apprehended for shoplifting and was sentenced to 3 years in youth custody. In 1989, he was given 100 hours of community service for carrying an air pistol, which he used to shoot birds and later dissect them. Sounds like a serial killer to me, but that isn't all. In 1992, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison for holding someone at knife point, only to be released back into the world with little to no supervision. What's chilling about these encounters is that while in custody, Stephen Griffiths had expressed his desire to become a serial killer quite often to prison guards and psychiatrists, and he was even diagnosed as a schizoid psychopath in 1991. Yet no one paid attention to these very obvious telltale signs, and maybe it is these shortfalls in the system that led to a very harrowing end for 3 sex workers. Living on the edge of the red light district, Griffiths used to spend a lot of his time patrolling the area, area, on the prowl for his next victim, befriending sex workers, and coming across as a harmless young man with something much more sinister brewing in his mind. In June 2009, Susan Rushworth went missing, and what became of her and the others after her shook Bradford. A year after Susan Rushworth, another sex worker, Shelley Armitage, also went missing in April 2010, and less than a month later, Suzanne Blamires became a victim. All three women met a similar fate. They were captured and murdered with a crossbow and dismembered in Griffiths' bathtub, who would then proceed to eat parts of their body and toss the rest in a nearby lake. Blamires' murder was particularly gruesome. Parts of her body were found in the River Aire in Shipley, dismembered into about 81 pieces, one of which was a decapitated head with a crossbow and knife embedded into it, along with some spinal tissue that belonged to Shelley Armitage. Hallway CCTV footage revealed that Blamires tried to make a run for it after being captured for 2 days, but was unfortunately chased and killed with a crossbow before she could make it. When Griffiths realized that he had just been caught on camera, in an act of defiance, he proceeded to flip the camera off. He even said that he's a misanthrope and has no regard for the human race. He made it a point to mention that he ate parts of his victims, claiming that that's part of the magic. Though these instances shouldn't come as a surprise at all, considering the man had a PhD in homicide studies, literally. Griffiths was obsessed with serial killers to the point where he idolized a fair few, including the infamous Yorkshire Ripper, who murdered over a dozen women, many of whom were sex workers. Not to mention all the literature he had on serial killers and criminology. If that wasn't evidence enough, he also had a violent alter ego on MySpace, where he went by the name Ven Pariah and left foreboding messages on his page. It's safe to say that there were quite a few warning signs before Griffiths struck, yet his crimes mostly went unnoticed till it was too late. It's perhaps this indifference and brutality that makes him one of the most feared cannibals in jail. Dangal Vargas. Our next cannibal is Dangal Vargas, better known as El Comediante or People Eater, and sometimes even the Hannibal Lecter of the Andes. Between 1997 and 1999, Vargas took Venezuelan media by storm, owing to the gruesome nature of his crimes. Dangal Vargas was one of the most feared cannibals in Venezuela, both inside and outside of prison. Dangal had claimed over 10 victims during his reign of terror near San Cristobal and was finally apprehended in 1999. Yet his cannibalistic tendencies did not stop there. In 2016, a prison riot broke out in a Venezuelan jail where Vargas was housed, an incident where Vargas played a rather horrific role. Vargas, along with 40 other men, were allegedly responsible for the murder of 3 men in prison who were stabbed, hung to bleed, and dismembered. But here's the kicker. Vargas was the one who decided to cook their meat and serve it to the other starving inmates. And this was just from his time in prison. But how did Vargas end up here? What circumstances led to him becoming one of the most feared cannibals in jail? Vargas was born in 1957 to a peasant family in Venezuela, whom he later cut ties with when they shunned him in fear of being possessed by evil spirits, and he became a nomad. Since then, Dangal Vargas lived a life of extreme poverty and committed petty crimes like theft of cattle and chickens. However, one crime of note was committed in 1995. Vargas was responsible for the murder of Baltazar Cruz Moreno, who he later cooked and ate, following which he was placed in psychological rehab. Though it is unclear as to why Vargas killed him, whether it was past rivalry or just plain cannibalistic desire, nobody knows. Soon enough, Vargas was able to leave the facility and was once again back on the streets of San Cristobal, homeless and hungry. Between 1997 and 1999, Vargas hunted and killed about 10 men and ate their flesh to assuage his cannibalistic needs. His victims mainly included athletes who were out for a run, laborers, or drunkards. He attacked his victim with a spear-like metal pipe, then dismembered them and proceeded to devour their flesh. But Vargas was nothing if not a picky eater. He never ate or attacked any women or children because he claimed that they were too pure. He didn't hunt heavy or overweight people either, citing reasons of high cholesterol, and lastly, no old people, since their flesh was tough and often contaminated with diseases. After cannibalizing his victims, he stowed away the fleshy remains in vessels. Vargas was particularly fond of muscles like the calf or the thigh, and used to make a stew with tongues and soup with eyes. He never consumed the hands, feet, heads, or testicles of his victims. Told you he was a picky eater. This is what Vargas said about his cannibalistic escapades. I buried the heads and feet and throw the other bones into the river. I also stored some meat in containers. The heart and the liver must be spiced up. If I saw a drunkard sleeping, I would kill him with my spear, cut his head off, and feel happy. I want to go back there and dig a big hole to bury them. I don't feel ashamed of anything. The lack of storage meant that the meat started decomposing fairly quickly, which necessitated the need to keep hunting innocent passersby in the park. His practice of scattering the remains of his victims eventually became his undoing when, in 1999, civil defense members found bones in and around the area, and this was eventually traced traced back to Vargas, who then confessed to killing and cannibalizing approximately 10 men. Since Venezuela was also overrun with drug gangs and a few satanic cults, it was initially thought that these remains belonged to either of them, but the officials realized that these were the remains of missing persons reported earlier. Dangal is allegedly now in solitary confinement at the Táchira Detention Center and has instilled a sense of fear in other inmates given his sinister history. Stephan R. You might not see dating apps the same way after listening to this case. Stephan R. was sentenced to life in Germany after he murdered and ate parts of 43-year-old mechanic Stefan Trogisch after they met on a dating app. Dubbed the Cannibal of Pankow, killed his namesake in cold blood, dismembered him, and scattered his body parts across Berlin. When his remains were found by a dog walker, they were instantly traced back to Stephan R. The 42-year-old was a former math and chemistry professor, but nobody knew that a seemingly innocent and unassuming teacher could have a much darker side to him. Stephan R. had an extensive online history of looking up topics on cannibalism and was active on many online forums relating to cannibalism and routinely scoured these platforms in hopes of living out his sexual fantasies relating to cannibalism. After Stephan T. and Stephan R. met on an online dating app, Trogisch and Stephan R. decided to meet at the latter's residence in Pankow, Berlin. After having sex, Stephan R. drugged his victim, slit his throat, dismembered the body, and cut off his genitals intending to eat them. The cannibal later scattered the remains all over the city, and soon enough the police came knocking at his doorstep. Stephan R. initially refuted the claims and to defend himself said that the victim suspiciously died after spending the night, and R. hastily disposed of the body in fear of being outed. On further probing, the police found about 25 kgs worth of caustic soda was found in his house along with a large quantity of lye. Traces of blood could be seen throughout the house along with spurious-looking tools like specialist knives and a bone saw. There was no indication of the victim's whereabouts, and he was reported missing, and the last person to see him was his taxi driver. While on trial, Stephan R. refused to make any comment on the matter and even hid his face from the media with a file. Presiding Judge Matthias Schertz called the act inhuman and sentenced him to life in prison without parole for murder and dishonoring the dead. On online forums, Stephan R. referred to himself as Master Butcher 79, allegedly inspired by the infamous German cannibal Armen Mayes, who will come up later in the video. The only difference, Mayes had a willing victim, however the same cannot be said about Trogisch. Nicholas Cocaine. We know that jail changes you in more ways than one, and more often for the worse, but something has to go seriously wrong to make you the most feared cannibal in jail. This is the story of French prisoner Nicholas Cocaine, one of the deadliest and most unstable cannibals in jail. In the past, Cocaine had had several run-ins with the law and had been jailed in March 2006 for attempted rape with a weapon and was detained at the Rouen-Ramon Center, which is where he got his alias, Cannibal of Rouen. He was charged with a crime so horrific, an incident that was only the stuff of nightmares. Let me break it down from the beginning. Nicholas Cocaine was born in 1971 to a mentally unstable mother and was abandoned at the Didas nursery in the north of France, and he was subsequently adopted at the age of 3. Growing up, Cocaine suffered from several mental health issues. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and was constantly in and out of psychiatric facilities. At the age of 6, Cocaine had even expressed the need to find his birth murder and kill her if she was alive or spit on her grave if she was dead. It was evident that young Nicholas had a deeply troubled and traumatic childhood, something that just compounded over the years. After he was incarcerated in 2006 and detained at the Rouen-Ramon Center, Cocaine's mental health plummeted. Terrible prison conditions combined with his unstable mental health created a monster about to take the prison by storm, but he can't say he didn't warn you. On multiple occasions, Nicholas Cocaine had expressed his cannibalistic desires to prison guards and had requested to be shifted to solitary confinement. You see, Cocaine had realized that he was a danger to the people around him, something that the officials refused to see, and denied his requests for solitary or even a psychiatric evaluation. His pleas for help fell on deaf ears. In January 2007, a fight broke out between Nicholas Cocaine and his cellmate Thierry Baudry over something as trivial as hygiene and toilet issues. Little did Baudry know that Cocaine was a ticking time bomb who could go off any second. Unfortunately for Baudry, that is exactly when Cocaine blew up, and what followed would go down in French prison history. Nicholas beat up Baudry with his feet, fists, and knees. Cocaine then proceeded to stab Baudry over 10 times in the back, neck, and thorax, and to seal the deal, he proceeded to suffocate Baudry with plastic garbage bags. Riding the adrenaline high, Cocaine decided to cut out a piece of Baudry's heart and eat it, though he only managed to cut out a piece of his lung and 2 chest muscles with a razor blade. He ate bits of his victim raw and stored some leftovers in a Tupperware to later cook and eat it with garlic rice and shallots. An unfortunate witness to this entire ordeal was his third cellmate, who pretended to be asleep in fear of being killed and died by suicide 2 years years later. Though Nicholas apologized to Baudry's family, he described the experience like so, "What's terrible is that it's good, it tastes like deer, it's tender. What I did, I loved doing." It is clear that the authorities paid no heed to cocaine's requests, and perhaps a crime so cruel could have been avoided had they acted in time. Katherine Knight, the first woman to be sentenced to life without parole, had to be featured on the list. Housed in the Silverwater Women's Correctional Center, Katherine Knight was a murderer and a cannibal with a long and brutal history of some bloody crimes. Knight was extremely obsessive and compulsive in her relationships, almost too violent to function, and that proved to be her undoing. Katherine Knight had a rocky childhood, to say the least, one of two twins. Knight lived in a highly dysfunctional household overrun with abuse, dejection, and violence. Knight was even sexually abused by members of her own family. Glimpses of her violent nature were visible at a very young age when she was called the school bully before she dropped out at the age of 15. After odd jobs here and there, Katherine seemed to land what she called her dream job, a butcher at the local slaughterhouse, tasked with cutting out the organs of the animals. She was eventually promoted and was given her own butcher knife set, which she hung in every house she went to should they come in handy, and come in handy they did. Her string of failed relationships, where she was increasingly violent, was a glaring testament to her obsessive nature. It all started with her first husband, David Kellett, who she tried to strangle on the very night of their wedding when he refused to go for another round of intercourse. Though the union lasted for a decade, it was tainted with domestic violence. When she was pregnant, Katherine burnt all of Kellett's clothes and hit him in the head with a frying pan just because he got home late. Highly dissatisfied with her married life, more often than not, her kids also had to bear the brunt of Knight's fits of rage. Unfortunately, I've just begun to scratch the surface. After Kellett, Katherine started seeing David Saunders, whom she had a daughter with. However, her jealousy and rage continuously got the best of her. She slit Saunders' dingo puppy's throat just to show Saunders what would happen should he cheat on her. She even tried killing Saunders by stabbing him with a pair of scissors. A feather in her cap was John Chillingworth. For a change, things were smooth sailing for Chillingworth and Knight, and they even had a child who was Katherine's first son. But it wasn't long before things ended. Knight cheated on him with John Price, her soon-to-be victim. Their relationship wasn't tumultuous from the get-go, and it wasn't until Price refused to marry Katherine that she let her true colors show. Knight framed Price for theft at his job, resulting in him getting fired. The pair took a brief break from the relationship and got back together soon enough, but Price refused to move back in with her, much to Katherine's annoyance. In February of 2000, an argument between the two culminated with her attempting to stab him in the chest, and a restraining order was issued against Katherine. He even warned his co-workers that should he not return to work, it was because Knight killed him, and boy was he right. After sending their kids for a sleepover, Knight planned and prepared for Price's murder. While he slept, she stabbed him 37 times with her butcher's knife, puncturing many vital organs. Price tried to escape, but to no avail, and he later succumbed to his stabbing wounds. With criminal precision, Knight skinned and decapitated Price and hung him by a metal meat hook she had recently installed. She skinned him so skillfully that his entire skin was intact in one piece, including his nose and mouth, and his decapitated head was found boiling in a pot. She cooked his meat in a dish with potato, pumpkin, beets, zucchini, cabbage, squash, and gravy, which was then served on 2 plates, with place cards that had Price's kids' names on them. Some cooked flesh remains were also found strewn in the front yard, which alluded to the fact that she had some of the meal and discarded the rest. When John didn't show up to work the next day, his colleagues remembered his warning and immediately went to his place to inspect. Upon seeing traces of blood near the front door, the police were called, and Katherine was found in a comatose state on the bed, having overdosed on a cocktail of pills, but not enough to kill her. At court, Knight was found guilty for the murder and desecration of John Price, though she claims that she has no memory of the night. The presiding judge deemed the crime so brutal and heinous that he sentenced her to life without parole. Mark Latunsky. December is the most wonderful time of the year, with festive cheer all around during the holiday season, but not for everybody. One such person was Kevin Bacon, who was the unfortunate target of cannibal Mark Latunsky. In September 2022, Mark Latunsky was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree premeditated murder and mutilation of the human body. The heinous crime transpired in December 2019, just days before Christmas. Mark Latunsky and Kevin Bacon met on the dating app Grindr, where Latunsky lured Bacon to his home in the township of Bennington, Shiawassee County, Michigan, where he murdered him in cold blood. Bacon's body was found 3 days after Christmas Eve, when his family reported him missing. After some tracking and tracing, the police wound up at Latunsky's doorstep, and they found Bacon's body in his basement. The body was found hanging upside down from the rafters with the throat slit and several parts of the body missing. Latunsky had allegedly severed Kevin's testicles, fried them, and eaten them. What's more, he had planned to use the blood and the bones as fertilizer and consume the muscles for jerky, for which he even had a dehydrator. In a last-ditch effort to save himself, Mark alleged in court that it was a case of assisted suicide and that it was mutually agreed upon that Mark would kill Bacon by stabbing him in the spine. However, he slit his throat instead and hung him upside down so he could expire faster. He initially even pleaded not guilty, stating insanity and that he was mentally unstable. Circuit Court Judge Matthew Stewart said, "The court finds that this is a crime of cold calculation and that Kevin Bacon's death was Mark Latunsky's design. However, the copy can't say that they didn't see it coming. Kevin Bacon was not Latunsky's only target." In October 2019, a certain James Charles fled from Latunsky's basement after being allegedly chained and tortured, as can be heard in his frantic call to 911.
Hey, Wesley 911, where's your emergency?
This is going to sound insane. I'm here in Detroit. I'm from New York, and I met this guy at the bus station who offered me a ride, and I'm not even sure where I am. Well, I broke out of this fucking basement, and I need a ride.
Not a month later, in November 2019, another man fled from Latunsky's basement, where he was also chained, and ran into his neighbor begging for help while on a 911 call.
Charlotte County 911.
I want to get away from some creepy guy. He had me tied up in his basement.
I'm sorry, what's that?
I'm trying to escape from some guy who had me chained up in his basement.
He had you chained in his basement? Where are you calling from?
I don't know. He's after me.
The neighbors seemed to corroborate the fact that it was indeed true and that the man was wearing a leather skirt and had belts on his chest with Latunsky in tow.
Pounding at my door at 4 in the afternoon, and I jump up, my dogs are barking like you probably hear, and this kid has his face covered with a rag and a phone to his ear, and he's like, help me, he's after me, just scared to death out of his mind.
Despite these two instances, authorities did nothing to investigate, and no charges were pressed against Latunsky. And as fate would have it, a month later, Kevin Bacon would be his victim, who wasn't as lucky as those guys who managed to make a narrow escape. While this cannibal is safely tucked away in jail, the question persists: would things be different had they taken any actions in the instances before Kevin Bacon? Armen Mayes. Remember when I spoke about Stephan R and how he was inspired by a certain German cannibal? Well, this is it. Armen Mayes made headlines all around the world when he was arrested for murdering and eating Bernd Brandes. Mayes was a German computer engineer, an unassuming man who seemed pretty normal on the surface. A good neighbor, well-spoken and friendly even, but nobody knew that he was harboring some dark secrets. Mayes had a somewhat rocky childhood after his father abandoned him. Mayes had no real siblings, was extremely lonely, and was known to have many imaginary friends. Growing up, Armen expressed his cannibalistic desires at the primitive age of 8 and shockingly drew inspiration from the children's tale of Hansel and Gretel. And these tendencies only grew stronger after his mother passed away in 1999. Soon after, things took an ugly turn. Shortly after his mother died, Armen Mayes posted an ad on the now defunct online platform Cannibal Cafe, where he asked for volunteers who wished to be eaten. The ad mentioned the need for a young, well-built man who wanted to be eaten. Though many responded to the posting, not all of them followed through, until Bernd Brandes came along in March 2001, a 43-year-old engineer from Berlin. Through the ad, Brandes sent a message to Armen Mayes titled "Dinner or Your Dinner," expressing his wish to be eaten. The pair made their way to Mayes' house in Rothenburg, where they also videotaped the incident. As gory as it sounds, Mayes and Brandes mutually agreed to the latter's penis being cut off and devoured by them both. After admiring his dinner, Mayes took Brandes to the slaughter room. Brandes proceeded to have a large quantity of sleeping pills and half a bottle of schnapps, after which Mayes proceeded to cut his penis off. While the initial plan was to bite it off, it simply did not work, and when they tried to eat it raw, it was far too chewy. The nifty solution to this problem? Mayes decided to fry it in a pan with several other condiments: salt, pepper, garlic, wine. Tragically, he burnt it in the process, rendering it inedible. Shortly after, Mayes ran Brandes a bath where he slipped in and out of consciousness, seemingly weakened from the pills, the schnapps, and the loss of blood. After contemplating his decision, Armen finally slit Brandes' throat and hung his body off a meat hook, where he proceeded to dismember him. Over the next 10 months, Mayes proceeded to store and eat over 20 kgs of human meat. It wasn't until an Austrian student saw the ad on the forum and alerted the police that the matter came to light and Mayes was persecuted. Since there were no set laws about cannibalism in Germany, it wasn't technically illegal, and the victim had consented to it, so the matter and discussion were rather gray. Despite videotape evidence, which has since been locked away never to be released in public, Mayes was convicted of manslaughter in January 2004. 2004 and sentenced to 8.5 years in prison. However, in a retrial in 2005, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to life. This is how Mayes described his experience. The first bite was, of course, very strange. It was a feeling I can't really describe. I'd spent over 40 years longing for it, dreaming about it, and now I was getting the feeling that I was actually achieving this perfect interconnection through his flesh. The flesh tastes like pork, but stronger. Though Mayes did admit that he regretted his action and wanted his incident to be a cautionary tale to the others, he did mention that he had fulfilled his fantasy and that he felt the need to consume a person to be truly at one with them. Nino Mbatha. How much human flesh is too much human flesh? The right person to answer this question would be Nino Mbatha, who entered a police station and turned himself in, claiming that he was tired of eating human flesh. Nino Mbatha, along with his accomplice Lungisani Magubane, were sentenced to life in prison in 2018 for committing a crime so monstrous that it would go down in history and make him one of the most feared cannibals in jail. In August 2017, Nino Mbatha went to the nearest police station to turn himself in. He was tired of consuming human meat, a claim so outrageous you have to see it to believe it. Mbatha knew his claim was too bizarre, which is why he came prepared with evidence. A pink school bag with a human hand and leg in it. A day that would be etched in the psyche of all police officers in KwaZulu-Natal province. Mbatha was a traditional healer and doctor, someone that people trusted in the small area. Ironically enough, the man people trusted with their health turned out to be a murderer and a cannibal. Convicted for the murder of 25-year-old Zanele Hlatshwayo, the pair, Mbatha and Magubane, were responsible for dismembering the young mom and using her body parts to bring them luck. Tired of being unlucky in money, Magubane made his way to Mbatha to turn his luck around and get rich. Mbatha told him that for him to get lucky, blood must be spilled, either of a woman or a child. Unfortunately for Zanele, she became their target. A drunk Hlatshwayo was captured by Magubane's accomplices and murdered in cold blood. Concerned by the lack of response from Zanele, her family members immediately went to the cops, where they identified Hlatshwayo's dismembered body, which had been used to make medicine. The body was found buried under rocks, waiting to attract maggots, since the creepy crawlies brought wealth with them. After confessing to his grisly crimes, where he was being forced to eat human flesh, Mbatha led the police to his home, where he housed all of his paraphernalia. The stench of decomposing human flesh could be smelt from a mile away. Here's an officer's account of what he saw. I followed the accused into the room where he retrieved a small dish. Inside, I saw something shaped like an ear and what appeared to be jaws. He then picked up another bucket that appeared to have intestines in it. However, Mbatha and Magubane weren't the only two to get their hands dirty. A third person was arrested but was acquitted of all charges due to lack of evidence, and another fourth person died by suicide while awaiting trial. And that's our video. Click here or here to watch more videos from our channel, and we'll see you next time.